was a long and lively debate in ancient Greece on the nature of music, spanning philosophy, cosmology, and psychology. Peripatetic musicology based its understanding of the nature of music on philosophical principles derived from Aristotle's psychology in order to address debates among their predecessors, primarily to shift the focus away from the physical sounds or their mathematical ratios towards the investigation of the psyche, which I show was a sort of proto-phenomenology. Music involves a voluntary activity accompanied by a natural joy. This joy grows and intensifies the energeia of the psyche. The nature of music is related directly to the nature, essence, or activity of the psyche. Peripatetic philosophers drew on principles derived from Aristotle's psychology in order to address musicological debates among their predecessors, primarily shifting the focus away from the physical sounds or their mathematical ratios towards the dynamic activity of the psyche in the act of making music. Music was central to ancient Greek life and had a profound impact on their philosophy, physics, mathematics, cosmology, and theology. Many different theories about the nature of music were developed by the time of the classical period of Athenian philosophy. On the one hand, music envelops harmony, which is understood through mathematics, whole number fractions, and reveals a divine, transcendental, universal, and eternal substructure of music. This is the Pythagorean perspective, which found support in earlier poetic accounts of the Muses, Apollo, Dionysus, and Orpheus. On the other hand, melody and style seem to be tied to mood, taste, and cultural biases, derived from the ethos theory of musical modes that Socrates attributed to Daemon in the Republic. This perspective problematizes the universality of music. Building on this perspective, which begins to relativize music, an empirical musicology arises which questions whether music should really be treated as having a universal essence or as supernatural, since we can reduce it to the physical movements of air, not unlike the debates found in the Phaedo. Between the ethos theory, the mathematical analysis, and the reductive empiricist theories, we find strong urges to deny the earlier religious and universalist views of a non-reductive and eternal nature of music. Aristotle, Theophrastus, and the unknown writers of the peripatetic text Problems shifted the focus of musicology away from all three of these sorts of conceptual, mathematical, and scientific investigations toward a more phenomenological investigation of music making as such. To understand the physis of music, we cannot simply analyze the ratios or reduce it to the physical vibrations of air. Instead of turning to the sounds or to their underlying mathematical ideas, we must turn our attention to the activity of the soul generating music. Natural inclinations to love music. The relation between nature and culture arises in several passages of the peripatetic text, Problems concerned with harmony. The one chapter stands out as particularly illuminating. Why does everyone enjoy rhythm and melody and in general all concord? Is it because we naturally enjoy natural movements? Now, a sign of this is that children enjoy these straight away from birth, and we enjoy different types of melody because of habituation. But we enjoy rhythm because it has a recognizable and orderly number and moves us in an orderly fashion. For orderly movement is naturally more akin to us, our souls, than disorderly movement, and so is more natural. And an indication of this, by exercise and drink and eating in an orderly fashion, we preserve and improve our nature and power. But in a disorderly fashion, we ruin and derange it. For diseases are movements of the order of the body not in accordance with nature. The problematists suggest that all humans are naturally inclined to enjoy music, but also that by following this tendency, the soul grows and improves its abilities. Here, physis is probably being used in a specific Aristotelian sense, found in the discussion of natural enjoyment in Nicomachean Ethics 10. Natural in this sense of pertaining to the form of self-initiated movements in the soul, which both preserve and improve the soul's power of acting by acting. It's as if the soul were acting back on itself so that it improves itself, analogous to a doctor healing themselves in Physics 2:1. Plato also considered music an innate joy. According to this line of thought, certain proportionate and orderly activities foster the growth of the soul's abilities and gradually increases the precision of its action. This pleasure is rooted in the activity of the soul. In this sense, music is not like tasting honey, not a pleasure passively transferred to us from an external object. Dancing, for example, is an enjoyment of moving oneself to the music, moving musically. Everyone loves music because participating in musical activity is naturally joyful and promotes beneficial or healing movements in the body and soul. The chapter ends by giving another further consideration of why it might be that we enjoy music so much by looking at the relational and contrasting elements. We enjoy concord because it is a mixture of opposites standing in proportion to one another. Therefore, proportion is an order that is naturally pleasant. Now, anything that is mixed is more pleasant than what is unmixed, especially if, being perceptible, the proportion in the concord has a power in the two extremes equally. There must be some contrast in order for there to be concord. There must be a mixing of different powers which agree and mutually amplify one another in a harmonic agreement. This is described in chapters 24 and 42, what is today called sympathetic resonance. Consonance, sum phonos, is a growing together, sum phues. Each of the notes is increased by the movement of the others, growing themselves together, sun auxein esthai. The tones must be sufficiently distinct so as to sound different, but also in some agreement. Consonance is not simply a minimum of difference, but a positive difference that produces a stronger unity in the concord than either tone on its own. Concords are mathematically described in terms of whole number ratios, 2:1, 3:2, 4:3. The ratio is more than simply the sum of separate quantities. It is a form or a relation between quantities. The orderly movement of the body and of music are movements that have proportion and organization, which form a whole that is beyond and greater than the parts. Here, agreement and similarity are the means to constructively intensifying the power of the sound in concord, which incorporates differences in a sui generis unity. We find contrast, anomalia, analyzed in another chapter. Is it because of the contrast that discord is a source of sadness? For the contrast evokes emotions and is found in extreme calamity or grief, while uniformity is less mournful. Because discord is irregular, contrasting, it makes sad-sounding music. But dissonance is in fact a source of our enjoyment of music. In another chapter, music is compared to wine in that it mixes bitter and sweet flavors. Melody weaves consonance and dissonance, sorrow and joy, making them sympathetically resonate and grow together. Music tugs our motion in quite opposite directions, which suggests that musical expression has a fundamental connection to the inverse tendencies towards joy and sorrow. These fundamental affections of the soul generally correspond to the musical harmonies of consonance and dissonance, but also major and minor, voicing, and the dynamics of tension and release, crescendo, or modulation, all of which can contribute to making a song more joyful or grave. It is contrast rather than uniformity that produces intense musical expressions. Another sort of contrast arises in the interpersonal aspect of music. Quote, "Why do people listen with more pleasure to people singing melodies they happen to know beforehand than if they do not know them?" One proposed answer is that we sympathize more due to the fact that we, quote, "sing with them," and we are told, echoing the quote above, that everyone naturally enjoys singing who is not forced to do it. Sympathy involves active participation and willing cooperation. But while we sympathetically unify when singing with someone else, the contrast between each voice remains and even adds to the aesthetic value of the whole, just as an octave is said to be more pleasant than unison. When singing along with someone else, there is both contrast and agreement, otherness and interdependence, so that melody, harmonization, and symphony are all activities greater than the sounds as a sum of parts. Music harmonizes the natural, joyful, voluntary, self-improving activity of the suke with the pleasure of contrast and interdependent participation. Aristotle on the joy of musical energy. In the background of these discussions are Aristotle's descriptions of pleasure and activity in Nicomachean Ethics, where he says after attacking the life of pleasure from various directions, that pleasure still plays a key part in virtuous activities, the philosophical life, and happiness. He announces this in Book 1, saying that things pleasant by nature are pleasant to lovers of beauty. The full investigation comes in Book 10. He begins by telling us that certain kinds of pleasure are not at all like processes of change which go from this to that, but more like activities, energeiai, which are whole and complete. This is evident, he thinks, from the fact that as soon as you are feeling pleasure, you are constantly feeling pleasure until you are no longer feeling pleasure. Activities do not occur faster or slower, but are always complete. As with sight, we are either seeing or we are not seeing. In this sense, activity is only contrasted to its relative inactivity in the logic of yes or no, the excluded middle. But he clarifies how it is different from activity and how greater and lesser degrees of pleasure affect the soul's activities, and how multiple pleasures either blend or work together or are fundamentally at odds with each other. There are unique pleasures that accompany each activity of the soul, arising from each in its peculiarity. As the soul progresses in its particular actions, be it music or philosophy, the pleasure unique to each activity reciprocally makes the activities grow, sun auxusi. The repetition and continuity of certain activities of the soul develop, perfect, and intensify the activity in question. Quote, when someone learns music, geometry, or architecture, their achievements are partly due to the fact that people make progress in the works they enjoy, so that they become better at their particular work because they enjoy it. Certain pleasures are natural because they are the cause of growth and progress in the soul's activity. Each activity brings joy to the person enacting it, and this joy concentrates and invigorates their effort to improve and maintain their chops, as it were. The joy motivates and facilitates the improvement of the activity that it accompanies, helping it to grow in its precision and its ease of execution. Joy plays a positive role by aiding, sustaining, and strengthening the force of the soul's attentive striving to persist and progress in its activity. Joy is both a cause and an effect of musical activity, amplifying in a feedback loop. Now, since each joy is concretely connected to an activity, often two activities will be impossible to enact simultaneously. A musician is unable to listen to someone talk if music is playing in the background. This is due to a predisposition, which directs attention and fixes it on the activity producing the greatest source of enjoyment. The intensity of the pleasure is linked to the activity of their soul. It arises from participating passionately in musical activity or in listening to speeches, but not both at the same time, or at least not for long. The passion of acting gracefully makes the soul more attentive, better at acting with precision, and more enduring in its overall toil. This joy has an internal and reciprocal causality which is integral to the soul's ability to act in different ways by learning and developing skills. The pleasure of musical activity and learning are natural, and according to the rhetoric, the soul's natural pleasures produce, restore, and preserve its natural condition. Furthermore, these pleasures are not natural as simply preordained or innate, and their opposite is not simply artificial pleasures. Rather, phusis here is used in the sense that the joys promote and regulate their own growth. In the Politics, Aristotle says many more things in agreement with these passages and with the Problemata. For example, the pleasure had in music is of a natural kind, owing to which the use of it is dear to those of all ages and characters. Aristotle also says that music has many different benefits, from amusement and relaxation to uplifting our spirits or invigorating us with enthusiasm. And, quote, music is by nature a thing that has a pleasant sweetness. It is not merely pleasant, but, as we have seen, a more active form of enjoyment. Because it is a potent source of joy, it will be useful for amusements and inducing relaxation. Yet Aristotle is adamant that its value exceeds this mere usefulness, as also having a therapeutic effect which can help us transform our moral orientation. The diverse aesthetic effects of music can also be brought together in a whole that is greater than simply jumbling together emotions in a series. In discussing the ethical and habitual effects of music, a la daemon, Aristotle also describes other cathartica, and healing, hiatrias, powers of music, which can soothe our tensions and anxieties. This parallels Iamblichus and Elias' claims about Pythagorean music therapy, as well as mythic accounts of Apollo, Dionysus, and Orpheus. Aristotle provides a phenomenological description of this affective transformation. It implies an increase in psychical tension giving way to a subsequent relaxation, an ecstatic trance-like frenzy which, as a purge, releases one from their emotional affections. Aristotle tells us that the intensity or forcefulness of these passions is a source of purification. The experience purges one's violent emotions, and this is followed by the pleasure of relief and release. He compares this enthusiastic purification to pity and fear, in an allusion to the effects of tragedy. The soul undergoes a series of transformations, whereby pain is healed and balanced out in the resulting cathartic pleasures. In these musical ecstasies, the contrast between pain and pleasure augments the intensity of the experience as a whole, while giving it a concordant resolution that is consoling and therapeutic. This dithyrambic music combines the opposite powers of concordance and discord, tension and relaxation, to provide a spiritual treatment to the soul's disorder and suffering. Thus, music is a natural joy as well as a medicine. Medicine and healing are in the realm of art, and so music evidently spans from nature to artifice and culture, especially as indicated in the Problemata, in the composition of different kinds of songs and melodies. Music can develop with new technologies and stylistic innovations. It is habituated, evolved, and even degenerates. Be that as it may, it would never get off the ground to begin with if it wasn't for our natural inclination to love concord, contrast, order, self-improvement, and clear intention. The cultural is rooted in the natural inclination, a second nature growing on the first, which points to music's potential for development in an unlimited number of ways through custom, habituation, and innovation. Music is an ability to harmonize a multitude of pleasures, just as melody and rhythm each provide their own unique contributions to song. Song is a joyful activity integrating a multitude of activities, and which has the power to spread its joy to us by seducing us into playing along and to join in its activity. Theophrastus on the nature of music. The idea that music involves natural tendencies and pleasures found in Aristotle and the Problemata is echoed in a principle laid down at the beginning of Theophrastus' text on the nature of music. He says, quote, "The movement productive of melody, which occurs around the soul, is exceedingly accurate. When the soul wishes to articulate it with vocal sounds, it directs the sounds and does so in accordance with what it wishes. The melody is an external sign of the wish motivating the effort put forward to produce it accurately. I say effort because it involves both the want and the success at steering its movements with precision. And I believe that this effort is to be understood via Aristotelian energeia. The accuracy of melodic expression implies psychical effort, and this effort, according to Theophrastus, is what explains the phusis of music, a movement of the soul that produces sonic patterns, sustains its attentiveness to experience the pattern as coherent expressions, and even improves its expressivity by becoming gradually more precise. The precision of the singer's melody is grasped immediately as evidence of the singer's want to articulate the notes in exactly the way they are doing it. The grace of melody is clearly intentional, and we find joy in this lucid evidence of their success. Music arises most fundamentally from this expressive wish that carefully articulates orderly movements of the voice, and that, importantly, has the effect of consoling pain. Another fragment reinforces this view. Pain, pleasure, and enthusiasm are affective states of the soul that motivate and produce melodic movements of the voice. The nature of music is found in the intentionality of the soul reacting to or embodying its deepest sentiments. Theophrastus' fragmentary text on the nature of music was transmitted to us by Porphyry and is presented as evidence for the latter's own rejection of the theories that melody arises merely from numbers and ratios, or can be reduced to physical movements. Instead of number, plurality, quantity, or physical magnitude, music arises from the selective accuracy of the soul as an intentional act aimed at articulating of a finite set of tones at the exclusion of all others. He says, quote, "There is only one thing that can be said to be the nature of music, the movement of the soul that occurs with a view to release from the evils due to the emotions. If it were not this, neither would the nature of music, exist." Nature here means the origin of its emergence and growth, what nourishes and sustains it. Music is a skillful and rhythmic movement between tones, working in an orderly way with a view to releasing from emotional pain. Music converts pain, tension, and dissonance into consonance, relaxation, and playful joy. Theophrastus used Aristotle and Plato's observations that music has the effects of diminishing grief and augmenting joy as the principle on which to study the nature of music. Instead of musical tones consisting of abstract intervals with precise numerical values, each musical tone has a dunamis and an idiotes, a power and a particularity. This provides a means to describe the tones in a melody as qualitative differences within a continuous experience. While this theory is not developed further in the fragment, it is explainable in the system of Aristoxenus, especially by building on the aspect of dunamis of the tone, which captures something like the potential for each sound to melodically move with its own qualitative nuance as we travel from one note to another. For example, if we go up by 2 whole tones, the next note interval has a viable dunamis, a potential. The potential of this note is melodically continuous with the prior notes and tends towards certain other notes with a specific function, such as building tension or finding resolution. The most notable function would be that of the tonic, which in the ancient Greek system is called meze, and provides rest and conjunction to a melodic series as described in Problema 19. Thus, the qualitative aspect of musical tones has to do with the way they relate as movements, forming an interdependent, interwoven texture of tones as a continuous, melodically meaningful whole. To conceive of music properly, we must turn to the intimate unity of the subject with the object, the soul with the sounds it makes, more specifically, the want with the accuracy with which it fulfilled it in sound. And when we look to the sounds, it is with respect to their particularity and potential to form melodic patterns. The nature of music is the dynamic expressivity of the soul which frees itself from spiritual afflictions and sorrows by enjoying musical activity. Peripatetic musicology shifted the focus from the debates surrounding ethnomusicology of Damon and the mathematical harmonic science of Pythagoras to a phenomenological investigation of the process and transformation of feelings, sentiments, and intentionality of the soul at work in the making of music. Aristotle himself said that the philosophers who had studied music had derived the evidence for their theories from the actual facts of experience. Peripatetic musicology understood melody and musicality in terms of immediate experience of soul activity making music, rather than as quantities or physical magnitudes of external stimuli. Massimo Raffa rightly points out that understanding the ultimate cause of pitch variation would be tantamount to going backwards through what soul does when it intends to utter a melos. Theophrastus' discourse seems therefore to belong more to the field of psychology than that of acoustics or harmonics. This is a shift not from the objective to the subjective, but from the mathematical scientific investigation to the phenomenology of music making. This shift provided Aristoxenus with a point of departure for his idiosyncratic investigation of melody as a sui generis science, exactly what Raffa identifies as missing from Theophrastus' fragment. The argument in the text is almost entirely negative, i.e., showing what music is not, and critiquing the theories which reduce music to mathematical and physiological explanations. This could be due to the fragmentary state of the passage as a quotation provided by Porphyry in support of his own project. What comes through clearly is that to investigate the nature of music, we are instructed to look phenomenologically at the pattern of psychical movements articulating songs from the perspective of the intentionality of the one producing it, and not from the analysis of the intervals between the sounds or scales in abstraction, nor the physical quantities of movement in each sound. Simply learning scales will not teach one to play with passion, and many musicians have learned to play before they learned all the scales. The physical and mathematical aspects are clearly involved in harmonics and tonality, but they cannot be explanatory of the origin or nature of music as such. Harmony is used in order to create tonality. Tonality is used to create melody, but the cause of melody is rooted in human life, suffering, and our desire for experiencing joy. Conclusion. Music for the Peripatetics consists not in the formation of concords and rhythms, the harmonizing of notes, or even the singing of a melody. It is more fundamentally a harmonizing of the contrary tendencies of the soul's activity and passivity, its joys and its sorrows. It is an activity that brings discord into play with concord, mixes these contrasts in a pleasing way, and facilitates a joyful activity of blending divergent movements into each other and fostering the resonance between its diverse movements and activities. The forms of music are truly heterogeneous, inducing opposite and diverse states, such as in the famous contrast between Apollonian soberness, concern, and clarity, and Dionysian styles of music that induce frenzy and madness, but also catharsis and healing. These inspired states are paradigmatic ways in which the musical soul sympathetically resonates and shapes itself in relation to melodic movements. Peripatetic musicology accepts these descriptions and attempted to explain them phenomenologically. The soul draws together diverse pleasures and activities into an ensemble of differences in unity, just as melody combines consonance and dissonance. Discord and dissimilarity, even sorrow and mourning, are present in every harmonically complex concordance. We turn to music as a consolation for our suffering and enhancing our joy. Composing music and deep states of listening can be profoundly therapeutic. Between the music and the soul, there is a sympathetic resonance growing together that parallels that of pleasure and activity. Studying the nature of music and melody is like holding up a mirror that teaches us about the soul.